Hello, welcome back. In the last video, we covered the Airbus A320 on its takeoff, its climb, and descent planning. In this video, we're going to cover our descent, arrival, and ILS approach, and of course, the landing. Let's go ahead and jump into the cockpit and get going. Alright, so we're about 20 miles from top of descent, about 23, 24 miles from top of descent. And if you recall from the last video, we talked about our descent planning. And we also talked about open descents and regular descents. Now in this case, we're going to do a regular descent. We're not going to do an open descent because we have restrictions along the way that we need to meet. If you want to visualize those restrictions, you can do so by hitting the constraint button here. And you can see on our navigational display, we can see our restrictions. So here below flight level 2000, next one above 14, below 19. So you can see restrictions on your map. Make sure you're going to make them. Now before we start our descent, you want to make sure you've completed your descent planning. You've set all your descent destination information. You've already briefed your arrival and your expected approach so that you can anticipate what you're going to be doing next. Always think about what you're doing next and don't get caught lagging behind the aircraft. Now, as I told you in the last video, I like starting my top of descent about 10 nautical miles before the indicated top of descent just to create a gentle descent onto the arrival. So we're going to do that today. And again, like I mentioned, we're not going to do open descent. We're just going to do regular descent. So the way I'm going to do that, all I'm going to do is right click this knob and we'll automatically go into descent mode and speed mode. Now the regular descent before you actually hit your top of descent, if you start your descent before you hit your top of descent, you're going to descend at 1,000 feet per minute until you intercept that vertical path that your aircraft already calculated. What this does is gradually starts your descent instead of hitting that path point and then, pitching down to 2,500 feet per minute or 3,000 feet per minute or something like that. This is just more of a passenger comfort type thing than anything. But it does allow you to start getting down earlier, getting your speed set earlier so you're not trying to fight your speed all the way down. So that's just generally why I like to start it a little bit early. Now, as we're descending, all we're going to be managing is making sure we're reaching our restrictions. We're not getting too slow, too fast. We're staying within those altitude restrictions. And we'll have several waypoints down as we go where we're going to do some settings. We're going to plug in some numbers, punch some buttons for our preparation for our approach. The next point we're going to look at is around the 18,000 feet mark. That's our transition altitude here in the United States. At that point, we're going to switch over our barometric pressure, and then we'll move on to 10,000 feet. Now, at 10,000 feet, we're going to be doing a good number of things. 10,000 feet, we're going to be setting our auto brakes. We're going to be making sure our performance numbers are accurate for our landing. We're going to be turning on our landing system for our ILS approach. And we're also going to be turning on a bunch of different lights for our arrival. So without further ado, we're just going to hold off until we reach 18,000 feet. And we'll do a couple things there. And then over to 10,000 feet and do a couple things there. Now with an actual star arrival like this, standard arrival, it's going to fly it pretty much on its own. You're just monitoring it. However, if you're flying on VATSIM or IVAO, there's potential they could tell you to do something that is not part of the arrival or skip a waypoint. Delete speed restrictions, speed up, slow down, descend faster, descend slower. Whatever they're trying to do for, traffic management, expect the unexpected. Expect to be thrown off. Expect something different. You never know what they're going to throw at you. As an air traffic controller on VATSIM, I'm telling you, just expect the unexpected. There's things we're looking at that you can't necessarily see. All right, with that being said, hold off until we reach 18,000 feet. As we approach 18,000 feet, the aircraft will let us know that, hey, we need to switch from barometric pressure to our regular pressure. But generally, you want to try to avoid the aircraft screaming at you. So we're going to go ahead and switch this from standard over to an actual barometric pressure, which in this case, our local barometric pressure is 29.92, which is the standard barometric pressure, but it could be anything from 2,600 to 3,200. I mean, you never know. I think the highest I've ever seen it in real life was, I want to say it was 31 something, but all kinds of pressures will change depending on the weather systems. So once you get your barometric pressure set, the next thing I want to do is turn on our terrain. Our terrain radar will let us know basically the actual terrain around us. In case we're in a mountainous area especially, you can make sure you're not going to run into the side of a mountain. So it's just kind of a common thing. Turn that on at about 18,000 feet here in the United States. The highest peak in the continental United States, I think, is only 14 or 15,000 feet. So turning on at 18,000 feet MSL, you're going to make sure that you're not going to run into any type of mountains. All right, next thing we want to do is we want to turn on our auto brake. Now, before we turn on our auto brake, we got to know what type of auto brake we're going to be using. To do that, we're going to switch over to our EFB and go to our arrival performance calculator. Now, again, depending on your specific aircraft, you're flying ToLiss or whatever, this is going to be different. But for Fenix, this is what we use. Now, I could pull the actual weather. Again, if we're doing real world weather, you can pull that weather directly. You can hit refresh METAR and pull the weather and apply it. But again, we're using custom, so I'm just going to throw it in here of what it actually is. And 2992. What that's going to allow me to do is figure out what kind of, basically what kind of approach or settings I need to set in order to land. Now, we'll make sure we're using the right runway. Now, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to be doing our approach onto ILS 05 right. So if we can here, make sure kind, 05 right. That looks good to me. We can go ahead and put in our landing weight. Now, what's our landing weight? Now, we can estimate this. It also is going to be in our EFB. So if we go up here, not EFB, into our flight plan. There we go. You can get an estimated landing weight here of 1449, but a better option is to look at your actual gross weight. So right now we're 1466, and usually I take that about 18,000 feet, sub 2,000 pounds. Generally, it'll be pretty close. You could do all the calculations if you want, but taking the estimated is going to be really close anyway. We'll just throw in 1449 for the sake of it. So we're going to put in 144.9. Now that is going to be past our max landing weight. Now, is that the correct information here? 1449? Yeah, that's what it's saying our landing weight would be. So that would technically violate our landing weight. What that means is technically we'll need to dump some fuel. So we know our max landing weight is going to be, what, 142.198, blah, 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 blah. So if we put in 142, and that's 142,000 pounds, by the way, we can see at low auto brake, we'll stop in 2,217 meters with reversers on. Now, we could put max reversers. It's not really going to change our distance. It's just going to reduce the amount of work the brakes have to do. It saves your brakes back, basically. So we're going to do max reversers. We'll keep it on low auto brake, and manual land, flaps full, auto thrust on. That looks good. So that means we can put low auto brake. Now, the key here is we need to make sure we're under that gross landing weight. Depending on your flight, it is very possible that you could be overweight as you're approaching the aircraft because of the required FAA regulations on how much fuel you have to have on board, which SimBrief does automatically for you, which includes all the way to your alternate, plus 45 minutes of minimum extra fuel on board at cruising speeds. So depending on what you're doing, you're going to have more or less fuel. Now, also, your winds are going to affect your fuel burn because it's going to slow down your ground speed, yada, yada. I mean, there's a lot of things that can affect your burn. So what we'll have to do is we need to burn some fuel. Now, how are we going to burn some fuel? There's different ways we could burn some fuel. We could vector ourselves all over the place, and then we could be, burning fuel that way. Or we can put ourselves into a hold. Now, if you're on VATSIM, you're during an event, it is possible they might throw you into a hold. Holds are actually not too difficult to throw in an Airbus. So let's talk about how to do that real fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our charts. We're going to go to our arrivals and the snake pit to arrival. First thing we're going to do is we're going to see if there's a default hold somewhere located in here. Now, on the direction we're coming, there isn't a default hold, but we could create our own. Let's say we wanted to do a hold at Alcove. That looks like probably a good one to do a hold at. All we need to do, we can go to our flight plan. Let's find Alcove. Oh, we're not going Alcove, my bad. We are going Lovins. Let's do Lovins. All right, so we select Lovins and we select hold. Now we have inbound course, right turns, time, distance. We're going to do, let's do 2.0. That's 2 minutes and the hold. And our inbound course, what's that going to be? Let's say 223. And let's see, it's going to put it probably, yeah, that's going to be your right-hand turns. That looks pretty good. Let's do a temporary insert here. Now, what that's going to do is you'll see it's automatically put our hold into the computer here. Isn't that really freaking neat? Automatically. Look at that. It's right there. So what it's going to do is once we hit Lovins, it's just going to keep us in this holding pattern until we burned enough fuel or when you need to exit, depending on what the air traffic control tells you to do. This is also a really good tip for you who's just starting to fly on maybe you're approaching too fast and you're like, I'm trying to catch up. I don't know what I'm doing. Just too many things are happening at once. Throw yourself into a hold, catch up to the aircraft. There's nothing wrong with requesting a hold on VATSIM. They're more than happy to give it to you as long as you don't have a bunch of aircraft behind you, right? Putting yourself into a hold is totally okay. Holds are pretty normal in the instrument flight rules, instrument flying in general. So really cool to throw yourself into a hold. And in this case, we need it because we need to burn some fuel. So what we're going to do is we're going to allow this aircraft to go into the hold, and we're going to stay in the hold until I think we've had enough burning of fuel to, land without being overweight here, which, if I'm not mistaken, go back to here, go to our arrivals, 142,000.1. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to wait until we're at 142,500 pounds. Once we reach there, then I'll exit the hold. So we're going to wait until we reach there. I'll show you guys how to exit the hold. It's going to be super easy. You guys, it's, oh my gosh. Computers make things so much easier than having to do it manually. Yeah, I learned to fly holds manually, so flying it with the computer is much easier. So without further ado, we're just going to enter this hold, and we're going to hold until we burn enough fuel. All right, we've burned enough fuel here. We should be good to go now on our landing. We've got 142,800 pounds of fuel on board, which means that we should be good to exit the hold. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to wait until we turn inbound again to exit the hold, and then I'm going to command the aircraft to exit the hold. You can either just hit IMM exit, which will exit the hold at the next inbound point, or you could literally just go direct to the next point if you wanted to from your position. Just remember, if you do direct to, it's going to be from your position. So doing the IMM exit is going to be your best bet. Now, since we're in the hold, it's a perfect opportunity to go ahead and start prepping for that 10,000 feet waypoint that I talked about. So since we're flying the ILS runway 05 right approach, we want to make sure that we turn on our landing system. You only have to turn on your LS, your landing system, when you are flying an ILS approach. You do not have to turn it on for a RNAV approach. But if you don't turn on the ILS, the landing system, you will get a blinking ILS indicator here. Big yellow, just blinking ILS, ILS, ILS. I think it's ILS Approach. That is letting you know, hey, you need to turn on your landing system. You need to turn on your landing system. Okay, so make sure our landing system's on. That looks good to me. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and arm our ground spoilers. Now, you may end up needing to use ground spoilers from here until the approach, but I like to go ahead and arm them at 10,000 feet in case I don't use them. If I do use them, every time after I use them, I put them back into the ground spoilers armed position. And that just helps me make sure that I'm not missing anything. I'll go overhead panel now, and I'm going to turn on this fasten seatbelt sign. I'm going to turn on the wing lights, turn off lights, landing lights to on, and nose light to taxi. I'm going to flip it to take off once I get my landing clearance. All right, so we've got our, kind of do a quick check here. Auto brakes are armed, trained on ND. We've armed our ground spoilers. We've turned on all of our lights, and we've turned on our landing system since we're flying an ILS approach. At this point, we are set up for our arrival and into our approach. Let's go ahead and tell it to exit the hold and continue on our arrival.
Now need to be seated with your seatbelt fastened, ready for landing. Please help us by handing in any rubbish, newspapers, or magazines that you do not want to keep.
All right, we're back on our descent now. We're under 10,000 feet. I like to switch this over to 20 nautical miles at that point so I can see the waypoints as we get closer. The waypoints get closer together. This allows me to see the waypoints in better clarity as well as those restrictions that we have. Now, if you recall, in our flight plan, we have a discontinuity here after DOSI. And if we look at our path here, we're at 80, then night, and then DOSI. Now, at DOSI, we're going to be at 6,000 feet, traveling at 210 knots, the same last restriction that we had at night. 210 knots is a good speed for kind of a downwind leg for the Airbus. As we turn on the final, I'll reduce it to about 180, and then ultimately when we get short final, down to our approach speed, which, if you remember, on our performance here, is going to be 139 knots. So after DOSI, we're going to switch over from a nav mode, which we are currently in, for the lateral navigation, to heading mode. Heading mode will allow us to vector ourselves onto the approach. Now, the kind of rule of thumb is when you're coming onto the ILS approach, you want to come on 30 degrees off of center line. So, when we're coming in here, let's say make a 90-degree turn here. We don't want to make another 90-degree turn because we're probably going to overshoot the localizer. So it's best to come off, do a 90-degree, and then do another probably like 60-degree turn here to be 30 degrees off of the approach. So in this case, with a 050 approach course, we're going to want to shoot, in this case, it would be 020. Because if you're flipping this around, looking north, right, it's going to be 040, 030, 020. So we're going to look for a intercept angle of 020 on the heading bug once we're coming in to this approach course. Now we're going to fly it out all the way to IIU, and then we'll make our 90, and then we'll make our 60-degree turn there to get onto the 03 or 020 heading to intercept the localizer. And what we'll also do is once we get there, we'll also reduce our altitude down to 5,000 feet. Now, I do want to bring up a point here that you should see. Now, there's a little D that was on there earlier, right before night. What that was a point on the arrival that this automatically switched to approach mode. So you can see now that we're automatically in approach. There is no more going back to descent mode. It's in approach. And that's why the magenta speed bug is 139 knots. Not 210, not 300, 139. We're maintaining 200 and about 12 knots right now because we haven't reduced our flaps. If we reduced our, dropped flaps or slats down, it would reduce our speed down to that green circle as well. So 1 notch is going to drop speed, 2 notches, it'll drop speed again, 3 notches, it'll drop speed again, all the way into our arrival. Now you can also manually set the speed by using the speed bug here, but we're going to let it do its automatic thing here. All right, so now we just went into manual. See that? So we passed DOC, now we're in manual flying. So we're going to continue flying here. Once we went to IIUU, we're going to reduce down to 5,000 feet, and we'll start making our right-hand turns. Now, we could go all the way out to Kelly, but we really don't need to for this approach. But again, if you're on VATSIM or IVAO, they may vector you who knows where. They could vector you in here at 4,000 feet or 3,000 feet. They could already be vectoring you onto the approach course. It just depends on what they're going to be doing. It really is going to depend on the air traffic controller who's controlling, how much traffic's in the area, all kinds of factors. All right, we're going to head and reduce down to 5,000 feet. What we're going to do now is we're going to let it go ahead and start descent. Again, right click to start the descent. Down to 5,000. We're going to go ahead and select heading mode now. And when you select heading mode, it's going to switch over to vertical speed here, -400. And that's fine. We're just getting down to 5,000 feet here. We got time to do that. So as it's now on heading, we can select the heading we want to turn. So if we're thinking we're on a 230 heading, what's going to be the 90 degrees off of that? Right? So add 90 to 230. And what do you get? 320. So if I turn this knob to 320, that's going to give me approximately a 90-degree angle. Then remember I talked about that 60 degrees turn you're going to make again. That's going to bring you onto that 020 radial. So what do you do if you add 60 to 320? We go past 360, that leaves 20 left in the 020, right? So it works out just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the heading knob now to 020 degrees, which is the intercept heading that we talked about. Now I'm going to activate the approach mode. Activating the approach mode will get the glide slope and the localizer armed. This is the glide slope diamond. This is the localizer diamond. As you can see, we're off the course right now. This will come sliding in and will center up. As you can see, is now happening. And we just capture the localizer and the glide slope. Sometimes you'll capture the localizer before the glide slope. Sometimes the glide slope, well, normally you're going to capture the glide slope after the localizer pretty much every time. But sometimes together as well, that can happen. So now I'm going to change the altitude here down to 2,100. and that's because on the chart here, that is the glide slope intercept altitude is 2,100 feet. So if you don't intercept the glide slope or localizer, you'll descend down to whatever your cleared altitude or down to 2,100 feet, not below it, and you'll intercept the glide slope and localizer. I'm going to switch this back over to manage speed mode so it can start slowing me down here. And I'll go ahead and drop flaps 1. And I'm going to drop gear. It's going to help me slow down even more. Gear is a great drag inducer onto the aircraft. So if you're a little fast, drop the gear early. It's going to help you slow down.
2,500.
All right, flaps 2. Flaps 3. And flaps full. Our go around altitude today is going to be 3,000 feet, so I'm going to go ahead and set that. And as we approach, what I'm going to be shooting for is about 2.5 degrees pitch up during the flare. So you'll see me kind of round out, and then I'll pitch up to about 2.5 positive degrees of wherever my line is, and that's about the flare that I'm going for. You don't want to over flare it, because then you're just going to float down the runway, and we don't want to float down the runway. All right, 1,000 feet, we got the runway in sight. We can go ahead and say we're established and we're stabilized. I'm going to go ahead and deactivate the autopilot. Now I'm in the control of the aircraft. But auto throttle stays engaged. You don't have to get rid of auto throttle. You can keep it engaged. In fact, I highly recommend that you keep it engaged if you can. And listen for the prompts. The prompts will tell you when you need to pull the throttle to idle. It's going to say retard, retard. That means you need to be pulling the throttle to idle. It's usually going to happen about 30 feet above. You'll start pulling it back, and at 20 feet it needs to be in idle position.
Above. Minimum.
Landing.
Glide slope. Glide slope.
I'm visual, so I don't have to worry about it.
40, 30,
There's 30.
20.
Retard and flare.
5.
And we're down. Reversers. Max. Nose is down. Negative 100. Here's 80. Here's 60. Reversers idle. Manual braking. And reversers in. And there we have it. We've just landed the Airbus. Now that we are clear of the runway, we can bring the flaps up. We can kill the landing lights and the strobe lights and the wing lights. And we're going to open up the master APU switch so we can get the APU ready to go. We'll turn off the terrain radar, and we'll also turn off the weather radar because we don't need that anymore. We're not flying. Normally, if you're on VATSIM, you had already contacted, ground. If the ground was online to get clearance to taxi to the gate. In this case, since we don't have any, we're just taxiing ourselves to the gate. But you can kind of see what we're doing. We can turn off the landing systems and the flight directors. Those can come off on both sides. Those aren't needed anymore since we aren't going to be flying. And we'll go ahead and start the APU now. And I'm just going to randomly choose. We'll just choose this gate right here. All right, our APU is now available. We can go and kill engine number 2. And stop. Taxi turn off and taxi lights coming off. APU bleed can come on. And then parking brakes engaged. And engine number 1 can come off as well. That wraps up this tutorial series on the Airbus A320. Hopefully these last 2 videos and this one has been helpful for you. If it has, please hit the like button and subscribe. It does help a great deal when you subscribe to the channel and when you like my videos. It helps with the algorithm. If you want to help me support me in more ways than that, please consider becoming a channel member. That's part of the Flight Club. I think it's as little as $2 a month. That's super cheap, but it helps support me, helps me produce content like this for you guys and for everybody else who's a part of the flight sim community. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you all next time up in the sky.